Picture this for a second. You're driving home after a long week. It's dark outside. You're 8 months into juggling 3 kids and a full-time teaching career. And you happen to be pregnant on top of it all. Blue lights flash behind you on a stretch of road with no streetlights, no houses, nothing but darkness on either side. What do? If you're Ebony Washington, you do exactly what safety experts and even police departments themselves tell you to do. You flip on your hazard lights so the officer knows you've seen him. You ease off the gas, and you keep driving, slowly, until you reach somewhere bright and public, in this case, a gas station, before you finally come to a stop. That single decision, the decision to prioritize her own safety and the safety of her kids, is what almost got her killed by the very person who's supposed to protect her. I'm an attorney, and today I want to walk you through exactly what happened on that Florida roadside in August of 2022, why the deputy involved lost his job in less than a week, and why this case became a lesson in exactly how badly a routine traffic stop can go wrong when the person holding the badge decides to escalate instead of de-escalate. Let's rewind to the beginning. Ebony Washington is behind the wheel of her minivan on State Road 200 in Bradford County, Florida. It's late on a Friday night. Her children are with her, including a teenager, a 10-year-old, and a 1-year-old. She's pregnant, and she's driving faster than she should be, clocked at roughly 75 in a 55 zone by Deputy Jacob Desu, who flips on his lights to pull her over. Now, here's where the entire story hinges on one crucial detail, so pay close attention. Washington doesn't slam on her brakes the instant she sees those lights. She doesn't pull over onto the shoulder of a pitch-black rural highway in the middle of nowhere. Instead, she does what any reasonable, safety-conscious driver would do. She turns on her hazard lights to signal to the deputy that she sees him and isn't fleeing. She reduces her speed, and she continues on for a short distance until she reaches a well-lit, camera-covered gas station. Only then does she stop. Before we go further, let's actually steelman the deputy's position here, because it's only fair. From an officer's perspective, any driver who doesn't immediately pull to the shoulder the moment lights go on could, in theory, be doing something suspicious. Maybe they're stalling to hide something. Maybe they're planning to run. A little extra caution in that moment isn't inherently unreasonable. That's a fair point, and I'll give the deputy that much credit. But here's the problem. Caution is one thing. What actually happened next was something else entirely. This wasn't a case of heightened alertness. This was a deputy stepping out of his vehicle with his firearm already drawn and pointed directly at a minivan containing a pregnant woman and 3 children, screaming that any movement she made would be the last mistake of her life. Let's sit with that for a second, because it matters enormously. Under the law, driving to a safe, well-lit public location before stopping for police is not illegal. It's not evasion. It's not resisting. In fact, law enforcement agencies across the country, including many in Florida, actively encourage drivers, particularly women driving alone or with children at night, to do exactly what Washington did if they're on a dark, isolated stretch of road. Turn on your hazards to acknowledge the officer. Slow down, continue to a populated, illuminated area, then stop. It's considered smart, responsible driving, not a provocation. And Washington executed it about as textbook as it gets. She wasn't speeding away. She wasn't zigzagging or accelerating. She was slowing down, signaling clearly, and heading toward the nearest gas station. Every single action she took said, "I see you. I'm complying. I just want us both to be somewhere safe." Instead, the deputy treated her caution as an act of defiance, deserving a firearm pointed at her head. Now let's talk about what happened once she actually stopped. Because this is where things go from concerning to genuinely alarming. The moment her minivan comes to rest at that gas station, Deputy Desu is already out of his cruiser with his gun drawn and aimed at her. And I want to be very clear about what that actually means from a legal standpoint, because a lot of people don't realize this. Pointing a firearm at another human being is not some minor in-between action. It is one of the most serious levels of physical force an officer can use, second only to actually firing the weapon. Courts don't treat it as a formality or a precaution. They treat it as a seizure, a genuine use of force that has to be justified. That justification standard comes from a landmark Supreme Court case, Graham v. Connor, and the principle it lays out is refreshingly simple once you understand it. The level of force an officer uses has to be proportional to the actual threat they're facing in that moment. A high threat can justify a high level of force. A low threat does not. So ask yourself honestly, what was the threat in this scenario? A pregnant school teacher, driving her own children home, no weapon, no aggression, no criminal history, pulled over for going too fast on an empty road. There is no reasonable interpretation of that situation where pointing a loaded firearm at her and threatening her life is proportional. The threat level was close to zero. The force used was close to maximum. That massive gap between the two isn't a gray area or a judgment call that reasonable people could disagree on. It's the kind of gap that constitutional lawsuits are built on. And it's not just the gun itself that makes this case so damning. It's what the deputy actually said while he had it trained on her. His exact words were a direct threat to end her life if she so much as moved. That's not a safety instruction. That's not, please stay in the vehicle or keep your hands visible. That is a man telling a pregnant woman that any motion she makes will get her killed. Reports from the incident also indicate he could be heard telling her, almost casually, that he wasn't worried because he had his gun right there. Listen to those two things together, the explicit death threat and the almost relaxed confidence behind it, and you stop hearing an officer who's afraid for his safety. You start hearing someone who understands he holds total power over another person in that moment and isn't shy about wielding it. And legally, that distinction matters. The test courts apply isn't whether the officer personally felt scared. It's whether a reasonable officer, standing in his exact shoes, would have believed that level of force was actually necessary. And there is no version of reasonable officer that points a firearm at a visibly pregnant speeding driver surrounded by her own kids. None. Which is a big part of why, when this footage eventually became public, even his own sheriff's office didn't rush to defend him. Then comes the part of this story that tends to make people the angriest, what happened after the confrontation itself. Washington was pulled from her vehicle and placed in handcuffs at gunpoint, while her children sat in the minivan watching and crying. Let's be precise about what that means under the law, because handcuffing someone isn't a neutral, routine part of a traffic stop. It's a restraint typically reserved for arrests. You don't get to place a person in that level of physical custody over a routine traffic infraction unless there's something more serious going on, some actual criminal conduct or genuine danger that justifies it. In this case, there was nothing. No weapons, no warrants, no resisting. Just a mother trying to keep her children calm while a deputy treated her like a dangerous fugitive. So what did all of this ultimately amount to, legally speaking? At the end of the encounter, Washington received exactly one citation, a speeding ticket. That's it. No charges for evading police, no charges for resisting arrest, no charges for anything at all beyond the speed she was going. Which means everything you just heard about, the drawn weapon, the death threat, the handcuffs, the terror inflicted on 3 children watching their mother detained at gunpoint, all of it happened over a piece of paper that could have been handed to her through a car window in under a minute. Now, here's the twist that turns this from one bad night into something much bigger, something that actually matters if you're trying to understand how the justice system responds to cases like this. Defenders of the deputy might argue that everyone has an off night, that pressure and adrenaline can cause even good officers to make bad calls in the heat of the moment. Except this wasn't an isolated incident. There's separate footage showing this same deputy in a completely different stop, forcibly yanking a man out of his vehicle in what's described as an aggressive and unnecessary use of force. That detail changes the legal calculus entirely. In civil rights law, there's a critical difference between a single bad decision by one officer and a documented pattern of behavior that a department knew about and allowed to continue. When you can demonstrate a pattern, you're no longer just building a case against one deputy. You're building a case against the agency that kept him on patrol despite knowing how he behaved under pressure. That's the foundation for a specific kind of federal lawsuit, filed under a statute known as Section 1983, which allows people to sue government officials and the agencies that employ them for violating their constitutional rights while acting under the authority of their badge. And that's precisely the legal path Washington's attorney pursued. So how did accountability actually play out here? This is honestly one of the more remarkable parts of the story. The stop happened on a Friday night. By the following Tuesday, just 4 days later, Deputy Jacob Desu was no longer employed by the sheriff's office. His resignation was accepted almost immediately. If you've followed cases like this before, you know how unusual that timeline is. Typically, officers involved in controversial encounters get placed on paid administrative leave, while an internal investigation drags on for months, sometimes over a year, before any real consequence follows, if one follows at all. The fact that this resignation happened within days tells you something important. The people reviewing that footage internally understood immediately that there was simply no way to defend what had happened. From there, Washington, represented by legal counsel, pursued a civil rights claim against the sheriff's office. Cases like this exist for exactly this reason, so that a family who was terrorized over something as minor as a speeding ticket isn't just expected to absorb the trauma and move on with their lives. Now, I want to leave you with the part of this story that actually matters most if you're ever in Washington's position, because that's really the point of breaking down cases like this. If you're driving at night and you see police lights come on behind you, but you're on a dark, empty road with no safe place to pull over, you are allowed to prioritize getting to safety before you stop. Turn on your hazard lights right away so the officer can see that you've acknowledged them and you're not trying to flee. Slow your speed down noticeably. If you're able to, call 911 and calmly explain that you're being followed by law enforcement and you're driving toward a lit public location before stopping. Then, as soon as you reach that safe spot, a gas station, a store parking lot, anywhere with light and visibility, come to a full stop, keep your hands visible on the steering wheel, and wait for instructions. None of that constitutes resisting or evading. It's the exact behavior that safety advocates and many police departments themselves recommend. And in Washington's case, it's also the reason this entire encounter was captured on camera in the first place. She stayed composed while a loaded firearm was pointed at her and her unborn child. That composure, combined with the footage that resulted from her decision to drive somewhere well lit, is ultimately what cost that deputy his job and opened the door for accountability. If this story left you as frustrated as it left me, consider subscribing, because I break down real cases exactly like this one on a regular basis. Cases where understanding your rights and knowing the smartest way to respond could genuinely make the difference in a dangerous situation. And if you found this useful, sharing it or engaging with it helps this kind of information reach more people who might need it someday. I'll see you in the next one.